Briefly go over some concepts related to layer 4 of the OSI model, which is the transport layer. So we cover this in approximately week 5 of our course, and we have a lab associated with this where we send packets via TCP and UDP between different programs. And TCP and UDP, the transport layer technologies, sit on top of IP, whereas IP is the actual addresses. Some philosophies that we have related to those IP addresses are defined using transport layer, TCP, and UDP. So I want to talk about these concepts right now. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the difference between connection-oriented and connectionless protocols. Really, we're just talking about TCP versus UDP. So with connection-oriented, that's another way of saying TCP. This is just saying that we want to establish a connection with the receiver, make sure that they're ready to receive information before we start sending them information. And connectionless is more like a broadcast. Think about, even instead of postal mail, even just a radio. You just start sending stuff out, whether or not the receivers acknowledge that they plan to see it, or even a Hail Mary if you're playing football, for example. All right, so TCP is your connection-oriented technology. You're not going to send information to them until they have verified that that they are expecting to receive information from you, and there's a three-way handshake that takes place as we create a connection via TCP. It involves SYN, SYN-ACK, and ACK. And through our lab and through Wireshark, you got to see exactly what that looked like. There's some concept of, as you go through the packets after this as well, in terms of the sequencing of the packets that get sent so they could be reassembled. One thing that I should point out here is that port numbers are the endpoints for communications, meaning that as we send something from a source to a destination, it's not just the IP address that's expected on the far end, but also the port number on that computer. And I'm going to talk about that more in just a second. Our user datagram protocol is considered connectionless, meaning that you don't have to set up something with the receiver before you start sending them information. Unlike TCP, there's no guarantee that somebody actually gets it. But again, port numbers are the endpoints for communication, meaning that you're targeting a program that's listening at a particular IP address. There are some very famous ports associated with TCP and UDP. And let me pull over, well, I'll start off with a short list first. So within there are 65,000 and change ports that are available to be delivered to on any given computer. So this is a very standardized thing. And I'm over in another window right now. I'm going to try and get to the top of an extraordinarily long Wikipedia article. And oh boy, I'm sorry, I'm killing the video here, but I just can't get the little slider bar in my hand. So it seems like it's 65,535, but sorry, I'm reading, but I'm not seeing it exactly. But anyway, there are some very well-known ones. Let me just show you some example ports that we do know very commonly, and you should memorize these and be familiar with them. So there's both the port and the protocol associated with it. So 80, typically a program listening on port 80 is a web server. The program listening on port 23 is almost always Telnet. The program always listening on port 25 on a given computer is SMTP, something that forwards emails that it receives. SSH is a program that's always listening on 22 or bound to that port. FTP is on 20 and 21. DNS is another one that we care about a lot, particularly in the course of this data communications class, because we'll play with that, and that's going to be on port 53. So definitely have all of those memorized if you're taking an exam in my course. But in addition to that, let me pull over this Wikipedia article that I stated that I was looking through. So at the top of it says list of TCP and UDP numbers. And if I start scrolling, um, first we get some of our well-known ones in the first 1,024 or so ports. And so again, repeating some of these ones we've seen, we've got FTP at 20 and 21. We've got at 25 we have mail SMTP, and if you start going through this, you will see things that are familiar to you off and on. Like there in 80 we see HTTP, and we'll just keep on going and going and going. And so a lot of the programs that we're familiar with in society are tied to commonly known ports on the left. So as I go far enough in this list, we'll see things related to, for example, video games like Minecraft and a bunch of other famous ones, databases that we use all the time. So when they start up on a given computer, they by default bind to particular IP addresses. And it's just crazy how long this list is. It just keeps going and going and going and going and go. My little scroller bar has disappeared off the bottom of the screen, and eventually when we get far enough, I apologize for this demonstration. I saw Steam in there. We've got RuneScape near the end. Might have been some other good video games in there. But notice as we get to the end, to almost about 65,000, that we have these ranges right here from 49,000 to 65,535, and these are typically for temporary purposes. So I'll just highlight that word. So as we experiment in our lab and we send TCP packets or UDP packets from one place to another, typically, or actually not even, actually I'm thinking of another context as well. When we're doing, when I started making this statement, I was actually thinking about network address translation, port address translation. Usually the ports that are associated with a particular message is being sent out so that a sending computer can be identified when the packet is returned, and it goes through a private layer, public layer translation in terms of IP addresses. The way that we can eventually find ourselves back to the original computer is by setting a port, one of these temporary numbers here. So clearly ports are something that are very important to us, and in terms of this class, I want you to pay attention to these ones and know them for an exam.